using visualizations to improve teaching and learning. And we have with us today James Folkestad, Kelly McKenna, and Marcia Moraes. So with that, I will hand it over to Jim. Is that
great? Yeah, perfect. Thank you for having us today. I'm going to share a screen here and give a presentation, and then we'll open it up to questions. Marcia is going to keep an eye on the chat. So if you have a question, you can type it in there, and we'll see how that goes. But I'll definitely try to answer some questions at the end. Let me go to my full screen here. And I'm assuming everybody's seeing the presentation. So the title, Etienne, is divulged, so that's good. We have been working on U behavior, and it's a collaborative project with a number of different folks across Colorado State University, two of which are here. And Etienne introduced Kelly and Marcia. And it's a collaboration with Unizin as well, because Unizin has given us some research funding to look at migrating U behavior over to Unizin server and then potentially using UDP data at some point. So we're excited about the efforts that have gone on there, and I can address some of those at the end of the presentation. But first, I'll just go through what U behavior is, kind of give you an introduction to U behavior. Is everybody, did that advance just fine? Shake your head yes, Kelly. Okay, perfect. Thanks, Kelly, you're my head. So I'll go through, what this instructional method looks like, and then we'll talk about some of the preliminary research findings that we have, which are extremely encouraging from both behavioral change level and also performance level. So U behavior is a tool that resides in Canvas, so it's an LTI tool. And this is a screen of a course that we've embedded it in and used a number of different semesters. It's a course that I teach, EDOD 651. And you can see on the left-hand side there, in amongst all the menu items, is U behavior. And that's the tool, that's the core of sort of the U behavior method. And I'll be talking about that, but I'm going to play this video. And Kelly, if you'll just shake your head and let me know if the video is playing fairly well as we move along, if I can get it to play here. Okay, so you're gonna see the cursor go over and click on U behavior, and then you're gonna see it open up the U behavior graphing application. Is it working, Kelly? No. Okay. Let me.
It's working for me.
Is it working for you, Etienne? Okay. Maybe it's
I don't know
just
if there's
Kelly.
supposed to be sound. There's no sound.
No sound, just me narrating. So are you seeing it, Marcia? Can you just shake your head, yes or no? I stopped it. Okay. So,
yeah, you stop it right now.
Yeah, I stopped it just because, but I'll start it up here again in a second. But it opens up the graphing application. And then U behavior is, this is the core of it. It's creating a visualization that students have access to. So faculty also have access to the visualization, but this is really student facing. And it'll open up, and then it's going to go grab the individual student's data, and it's going to graph that in this visualization. I'll talk about the graphs extensively as we move forward through the presentation. So if you're not seeing this playthrough, don't worry. I'll get to the visualization and talk a little bit more about it. But you'll get an idea of how it works in Canvas if you can see this. So you can see the spinner up on the right-hand side. It's going to spin for a little bit. It's going to graph out live the student's data, and I'll talk about what this data is in a second. It's an interactive graph, so students can roll over certain things and see different information. But I just wanted you to get an idea of what this looks like in sort of real time. The student can then download their graph and submit that to the faculty member. So there's actually a download button on the upper right-hand side. So if you saw that, great. If you didn't, I'm going to go through the details of the graph here in a second. The graph looks like this. So this is what the graph looks like when the student gets it. Again, this is an individualized student's graph. And what it's graphing is the student's practice. It's graphing the student's practice across an entire semester And they're practiced with specifically with what we call retrieval practice activities, but these are really quizzes in Canvas. Okay, we decided to rename quizzes to retrieval practice activities because what we're trying to get them to do is not think of these as assessments or quizzes to see how much they know in that moment, but these are really about retrieving and practicing over time, and then spacing out their practice of the content over time. So as you can see here, the RPA, there's a legend at the top. Let me see if I can get a laser pointer here. There's a laser at the top here, or a legend at the top here that shows all the different RPAs that the student has taken up to that point in time. They all have a different icon or color, and then you can see each individual time that the student took it across the semester. So you can see the student took RPA number 1 about day 7, and they waited for a while, and they took it on day 28 approximately twice, and they took it again on day 43 or 44 or so. And then they didn't come back to that RPA later on, which I would have been encouraged by, but they are practicing that particular RPA over time, and they're also spacing it out. So they're going between this RPA 1 to RPA number 2, which is right here, jumping to RPA 3, and then again back to RPA 1. So they're going between and sort of mixing up the practice of the quizzes or retrieval practice activities across the entire semester. On the axis on the left is just their percentage correct. We didn't put points in here because we're not giving them points for doing this. We're actually trying to get them to encouraging them to practice. And these two practices, you might recognize these from the science of learning. These two practices have about 60 to 70 years of empirical evidence that these types of practices boost learning and boost retention of information if you practice in these ways. So we're really trying to encourage students based on that evidence to change their behavior, to change their practice so that they will retain information longer term and perform better on retention tests and also comprehensive final exams. Right, so that kind of gives you an idea of the core. This is really the core. One other thing that I like to point out is that we generate 2 scores for them, and they're at the top. One is this space practice score, and I can talk about the algorithm details. It's really a simple algorithm, but I could talk about those if you were interested in that later. And then this is a mixing score, whether they went back and forth between the different topics, basically. And those scores go up over the course of the semester as they practice, and they practice in those specific ways. So those scores are introduced to students in the class, and they know what those scores are, and they know that those scores are important, and they know that the practices are important. And I'm going to explain here in a second how we sort of introduce that. All right. So this is what the entire, so like I said, the RPA graph is sort of the core, and that tool is the core of the technology. But the U-behavior method looks like this. So the students get an introduction, about a 10-minute tutorial. You can see this one here is branded with CSU, but we can brand it with any university. We can put that branding on there. And this tutorial basically teaches the students about the RPA graph. It teaches them about those practice behaviors that we're really trying to encourage students to engage in. It teaches them about those 2 scores, and it teaches them how we're going to grade their basically use of the RPAs at the end of the semester. Right? So they get this tutorial, it teaches them those things, and then they get some the retrieval practice activities, which are the quizzes. They get those, and those open up throughout the semester, and they're available basically throughout the entire semester so that they can practice. And then they have access to the graphs. They can click on that U-behavior tool. They can open the graph up at any time. They can see how they practice with those RPAs during any point in the semester. And then the other thing that we give them, or we use to encourage change of behavior and get them to engage in these behaviors, is to get them to do some reflections. So we have them do 3 reflections spread out across the semester. And we basically ask them these questions that are here and have them reflect. It takes them less than 5 minutes to do. Basically ask them, you know, how does your graph compare? How does your behavior graph, your RPA graph, compare to an example one that we give them? And, you know, then, you know, ask them if they are doing the specific behaviors, sort of pointing out some things. And then we ask them if they're going to change their practice behavior in the future going forward in that semester. So this is really an opportunity for them to look at the RPA graph, reflect on how they've been practicing up to that point, and then make a plan for changing behavior in the future. And we really do this to sort of to get them and encourage them to think about that behavior and change the behavior so that they end up getting a positive score at the end of the semester, and think about the behaviors and potentially what that might have, how that might impact their performance in the class and those sorts of things. The other thing that we do is that we do have a rubric. So this is the rubric right here that we set up. We introduce that rubric to them at the beginning of the class in that tutorial. And so they know that they're going to be graded on how they behave across that specific semester. So they're going to earn points basically for practicing in the ways that we're encouraging them to practice, practicing in ways that we know that will help them improve their performance on retention tests, and that sort of thing. So we build the points into that. So that's the U-behavior method. And again, with sort of that technology, that core technology, which is the U-behavior tool, which you can open up and get a graph. Right. So hopefully that describes sort of what this is all about and what that method looks like. So I would assume there's questions. Are there any burning questions right now, Marcia, or are we good?
Not yet.
Okay, great. Okay, we'll keep going then. So then we're going to talk about the results. So, you know, we did this because we're really intrigued by these particular behaviors. We did this because we know that in the past we have really been challenged to get students to behave in ways that are beneficial for their learning in this regard. So these two specific behaviors, we observed that students were not engaging in these behaviors in the past. So we built this tool and we experimented with this tool and refined this tool and refined the process to the point where we felt like we were ready to run a pilot research project, and we did that in an introduction to microbiology course in the fall semester 2020, and that's the research the preliminary research and findings that I'd like to discuss now. So, you know, we basically utilize the behavior method to conduct this research. So the questions that we were really curious about were, can we get students to change their behavior? We didn't really know. Right, we didn't know how many we'd be able to get to change, if we would see a significant change in behavior. Would they space out their practice given what we're teaching them and encouraging them to do? Would they interleave and mix their practice? We didn't know. So that was one question. And then, do students who use the U-behavior outperform those who did not? So in a retention test, so did they really? Did we see any performance boosts when students really engaged in these types of practices? So those were the two fundamental questions that I'll address. So the study, again, was in this introduction to microbiology course, lots of content, right? Difficult course, notoriously difficult course. I don't know how many of you have taken micro, but it's not easy, right? Lots of content to absorb and retain. The total number of students in the fall semester was 266. The instruction was all online due to COVID-19, so it set up this really cool experimental condition or opportunity, I guess, condition. And we set up two conditions. We went through IRB, got approval to do this experiment. We set up two conditions which were section-based, so there are actually 3 sections of microbiology. And so we had a U behavior section, which had about 86 students in it. And then we had a non-U behavior section, which was 180. There's actually two non-U behavior sections, which ended up being about 180 students. There was identical content was covered, and they had identical exams across all the sections. And when an important piece, and I'll just sort of nip this in the bud right now, an important piece when we looked at the differences between these sections, because this could always be a problem. Maybe we just happened to choose the section that would have the brightest students in it. When we looked across all those sections, there was no differences in prior performance, high school GPA scores, CCHE index, which is a Colorado index score, which includes ACT and SAT scores. And there were no significant differences between sections when it came to CSU GPA for the previous semester before this particular course. So, you know, the population between these sections, and there were no differences between the students as far as their academic performance, just to sort of set up the results. As far as the experimental conditions go, this is important for you to understand. In the U behavior condition, we had them go through the tutorial. We had them engage with these retrieval practice activities. We had them look and reflect on how they practiced 3 times throughout the semester. Okay, that was their condition. And remember that in the U behavior condition, they're earning the points. They're basically earning the points for based on their behavior. So we used the rubric and we told them we're going to use a rubric to essentially look at their graph at the end of the semester and give them points based on that. In the control condition, there was no instruction, right? We didn't give them any instruction on, you know, spacing and mixing is good for your practice. We just gave them the identical retrieval practice activities. They were even called retrieval practice activities. Okay, we didn't you know, use the word quiz, for example. We just gave them the identical RPAs, retrieval practice activities, and we gave them the identical opportunities to practice them. And they were basically given the same amount of points for practicing with those RPAs, but they kept the high score that they earned. All right, and we gave them some reflection questions. So, you know, we asked them, you know, how they think they were doing in the semester and if they're going to change their behavior at all, or those sorts of questions as well. So those were the 2 conditions. It's important to also realize that between those 2 conditions, we collected, we not only collected the RPA graphs from the experimental condition, but because the tool was running and we could collect it on the control condition, we collected the graphs from both conditions. So we had scores for those in the experimental condition and in the control condition. And that's what we'll look at. How those behavior. It's important for you to realize that those behavior scores are what we're going to compare when it comes to behavior. And so that's what we'll look at next. So as far as the behavior scores go, you can see that this is the descriptives. Right here are the means for spacing and the means for mixing on the U behavior condition, and down here are the means and for the mixing and spacing for the non-U behavior or non-U behavior. There were significant differences between the conditions, so we significantly changed their behavior, and most importantly, the effect size was huge. The effect size was about 1.8 when it comes to behavior change. Okay, so we're significantly changing student behaviors with this particular condition. This is really exciting. We had no idea whether we were going to be able to do this or not. We're seeing significant change. And just to sort of bring this to a visualization, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show some graphs here. But this is what we see typical from the control condition. So this is the no U behavior condition over here on the left-hand side now. But typically what we see in the no control, or the control condition of the no U behavior, is that students stack up their practice. So you can see that this RPA1 here, you can see that the red dots are just stacked on top of each other. As a matter of fact, there's one right here, it's just underneath this other one, but they stack them up until they get 100%, and then they stop and they never practice that particular content again. Again, we know from the science of learning that these types of behaviors are not conducive to long-term retention, right? But we see this behavior in about 80 to 90% of the students who are engaged in just basically, you basically say, okay, here's some things for you to practice. Here's your quizzes. These are good for, for you to practice. This is what the students do. And we know that this behavior is not conducive. Okay, so we see this stacked mass practice, which we know is not good for long-term retention and learning. In the U behavior, we see something different. Okay, we see space practice, we see mixed practice. So this is a student, an actual student's graph at the end of the semester in the U behavior condition, and you can see the different style of practice. This is really encouraging to us. This is really exciting. So, of course, we started thinking, what's going to happen with performance? And I'll get to that. But just to show you some more examples, so you don't think I'm making this up, here's a bunch of non-U behavior graphs. Okay, this one up here, I threw it in because I didn't want to cheat. I could have probably put in about 80 of these, okay, that looked like this one over here on the right-hand side. But just so I wasn't completely, skewing the picture. This is the best student in the non-U behavior condition. Okay, you can see that this student's scores were quite high. That was very rare in the non-U behavior condition. So this student either understood something about spacing and mixing and the benefits of that practice, or they kind of fell into this just because of what they were doing. But you can see they're doing a lot of it. That's really interesting. I'd love to talk to the student. We didn't talk to the student, but I'd love to talk to the student, see what was going on. But most students look just like this. You can just see all sorts of stacking mass practice. Okay. This right here is basically cramming, right? This was right before the final exam. You can see there's all this space in here where they didn't practice at all, space here, and then they just stack these up, mass practice, cramming right before the exam. And then here's 4 from the U behavior condition. And you can see they radically look different. And that's why you see such a huge change in effect and radical difference in the scores. Not much to say here, just really interesting to visualize this and see this change. So as far as performance, so what we did, we're still analyzing the data, and we have comprehensive final exam scores, which we're still modeling and trying to figure out what the performance difference is on that. So I'm not going to present that, but we did a retention test, and this is not surprisingly, that's why I'm going to present it here, is probably what you would expect when you get students to practice in these ways. What you would expect is that they retain this information longer term. And so what we did was we took 2 sections of that MIP 300 course, section 0, these are just internal section numbers, but they're 2 sections, 002 and 003, about 196 students between those 2 sections. These 2 sections were taught by the same instructor, so that's one of the reasons we selected them. And then the 002 section was that U behavior group. Okay, so that was those were the students in that group that basically got that U behavior experience. We waited for a month after this course ended, and then we did a retention test. And we got 94 students to take the retention test. We encouraged them to take it. We gave them some participant pay, but we got 94 students, and that's a pretty high number. when it comes to retention tests. It's almost half. So that was really encouraging. And what we found, because of the way it sort of flushed out, just out of that natural, was that we ended up with a lot more students that took the retention test that were in the non-U, or that practiced in a non-U behavior way, and about 16 students who practiced in a U behavior way. So we're breaking it out a little bit here because the ends were so small. But we ended up with basically 16 students who practiced in a high practice U behavior way, and 78 students who practiced sort of in this non-U behavior practice way. So if you go back and you think about those particular graphs, we were looking at those graphs, we were looking for their scores, and we broke that down, and those are the results I'll present on the retention test. So here are the descriptives. So on the highly effective behaviors, this is the U behavior behaviors. The mean score is here, 65, and the less than optimal behaviors was 57. And there's a significant difference between those two conditions. And the Cohen's effect size is about 0.64, which is good, I think, because it's about what we would expect, given what we know about these two different behaviors and their impact on retention of information. So that's in line with essentially what we know from the research when it comes to effect on retention tests. So that is encouraging. We have more to do. We have lots more data to analyze. And we're doing, which I think is on the next slide, we're doing a replication study. It is now underway this semester, so we can collect more data and see if we can replicate these results, not only in the behavior change, but in the performance boosts. So the key, some key takeaways, all students had access to the same RPAs, just sort of to recap. All students had access to the same RPAs. There were no significant difference between the number of attempts between the groups, which is really fascinating to me, right? So let me just bring this point home because this is important. Remember, we had one group who just got the RPAs and said they're available for you to practice, and we ended up with those stacking behaviors, right? And then we had another group, which is the U behavior group, and we had them spacing out and doing all this stuff. And you might look at those and go, oh, wow, well, maybe that U behavior group just practiced them a lot more. And when you look at the differences between the groups and number of attempts, they're identical. Okay, there is no significant differences. So the students who are stacking them are doing those practice tests basically the same number of times. Okay, they're just not getting the boost in retention and learning. So they're spending the same amount of time. Again, there were no significant differences between the groups in preparation. So between, these weren't just the better students who were engaging in these practice behaviors. So at least at that level, we feel pretty comfortable that we're not just picking out the brightest students or the best students. And the big difference between the two groups then is how they practiced or how they engaged with those RPAs, and those RPAs and that practice difference had an effect on how much they retained. So, this is just maybe a hypothesis, I would say, but this is what's kind of intriguing to me, and I think resonates with a lot of administrators in academia, is that if we think about the effect size, I didn't talk about this earlier, but the effect size was about 0.64 is what our initial results are showing. That's about a letter grade difference in performance. So if you're into effect sizes, you'll kind of recognize that. If you're not, you can look it up or trust me, but that's about a letter grade difference in performance between the two groups. right? So you can think, I was talking to this with the microbiology instructors, and you can think about that. And for them, a passing grade in micro, believe it or not, is for certain majors is a D. Okay, so you can imagine you can get more students passing micro, which means they might go on and excel in some STEM major that they wouldn't have excelled in otherwise, right? So this can have a significant impact on the DFW rate or the DFW problem that has been consistent at our university and other universities in STEM majors. So I think this is really intriguing. Just by changing the practice behaviors and the way that people are practicing with this particular tool, we're seeing that sort of potential impact. I think that's really intriguing. So we still have that again, that's a hypothesis, but we still have some work to do there. But we could look at this shift in DFW rates between U behavior classes and non-U behavior classes, for example, in the future. So that's, I think that's my last slide. That's my last slide. So I'm going to stop there, and we have plenty of time for Q&A. So I'm totally fine if people want to open their mics. If there's a question in the chat, Marcia.
Yeah, we have a question from Etienne. Etienne,
Yeah.
do you want to ask her question or just me to read it out loud?
I can ask it. So thank you, James.
Yeah.
What is the what's the theory behind why spaced out RPAs lead to greater retention than stacking, and do we know how long those retention benefits last? You tested after a month.
Yeah.
Are there tests about, does that do people retain 6 months out, 1 year out? Is there utility in retention that far out?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the theory basically, to get at your first question, the theory really gets at decay. It's decay of memory, right? And we all know that we forget things over time. So you can imagine if I stack up, if I take that RPA 1 at the beginning of the semester, I stack up my practice all on that day, basically I'm getting to the 100%, right? I got them all right. But then my memory for that content is decaying over time, right? So it's the boost that you get from practicing and spacing over time. The mixing, or what's known in the cognitive science literature as interleaving, is less solid, I guess you might say, when it comes to sort of the theory of why interleaving works, or if it even works. There's some, it's controversial. We played around with the scores just because I don't know, they're interesting. There's interesting stuff there, but I think we have a lot of work to do on that particular score. But what's kind of fascinating is that if you space out your practice in across the semester of RPAs, of quizzes or RPAs, you're naturally interleaving. So you're getting that, if there is a boost to be had there, you're going to get that boost for the interleaving mixing as well. So I hope that answered your first question. The retention piece is again, it's decay, right? We're naturally going to decay over time. But what's fascinating is that you're getting a boost just by changing those behaviors, not doing it more, just by changing the way you're doing it, and you're getting a boost at that month time period. Now, if you don't refresh or get that, sort of boost your memory at some point down the line, I don't know, they really don't have any clear definition of what that point would be. But if you don't, your memory is going to decay. It's just a natural phenomenon that we all experience. So why we chose the month was for a couple reasons. One, we had a natural break, right? And these natural breaks are in there in our academic cycle, right? So a student has a natural 1 month break. So it made logical sense to us, like, okay, what if we sort of did this retention test at the beginning of the next semester? I mean, we would hope that our students would retain the information that long, right? And what we found is they don't. We kind of know that because it's going to decay. But if we get them to practice in a different way, we get a boost, right? So that's really encouraging. As a matter of fact, some of our retention data we did in a subsequent course where the instructor expects her students to retain the information from micro as they come into this advanced microbiology course. Does that help?
Yep.
Okay. Are there other questions in there, Marcia?
Not yet.
Okay. Anybody else want to open their mic?
Hi, I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Matt.
Can you explain or describe how the RPAs were created? In particular, was it a team approach? How long did it take? How were the questions validated? And then as a second part, have you done any testing or worked with any non-STEM courses like in the humanities? Thank you.
Okay, let me address that first one. No, the answer is no, we haven't, but we would love to. We would love to do these types of rundowns in humanities, other science courses, yes, but we haven't yet. This is our pilot data. It's in microbiology because this is kind of a segue to your first question, because they had the quizzes and the RPAs developed. So we didn't develop those. They had developed them. They validated them at some level, basically the instructor level. There's work to be done there, obviously, but they had those already pre-developed. And the way they developed them right in Canvas in the quizzing tool. They developed banks of questions. So the RPAs draw from those banks. They'll draw 10 questions from a bank. Each time the student boots up an RPA or takes the RPA, they're getting different questions on the same content, but different questions. So they get those that different question experience. So that's how, that's how I can explain how they were developed. I think there's a whole lot of effort and work and energy that needs to go into sort of figuring out how to develop RPAs that potentially have the biggest impact with regards to this practice. So I think there's still work to be done there. Did I answer all your questions there? Sorry, Matt.
Yeah, that was very helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and one more thing before I forget, and this might come from a question, or maybe I'll preemptively answer someone's question, is that we've been working with Etienne and his group to put UBehavior up on Unizin servers. It was on a pilot server last semester. We used it in a course, and so the next step is to put it in the production server, and then the idea would be that other universities could pick up the UBehavior tool, have the LTI tool put into their Canvas shell. So you would see that link on the left-hand side and then potentially use that. And use it. So if you're interested in that, you can reach out to me and let me know. We're still developing sort of manuals and tutorials that can help faculty members who are interested in this think about how to basically put their quizzes into, get them ready for UBehavior, and how to put the tutorial into their class. So, you could have access to that the tutorial that we used, and then how to embed those reflections and those reflection questions. We're glad to share those as well if you're interested in engaging in this process and trying it out. So that's kind of where we're at. I just wanted to make sure everybody knows that we're moving down that pathway.
James, so
Yeah.
Carmen has a comment guessing that this is generally based on the spacing effect.
Do you want to answer that, Marcia?
Yeah, so I think just connecting with the first question from Etienne, we have a very long research on spacing effect, testing effect, on the psychology research. And yes, we are using those concepts as to boost long-term retention. Kelly, do you want to add something?
I'll add something. You know, yeah, that's perfect. Yes, it's based on the spacing effect. It's based on the testing effect. And one thing that was intriguing to us when we started this work was that we're working with cognitive psychologists, which were on the first screen, and they're teaching a course that talks about these particular behaviors. And one of the challenging things for them was to get students to change behaviors. They could, you know, talking about it, telling students these are the things that will help you long-term retain information, help you perform better on, potentially perform better on comprehensive exams. The students, if you looked at their behaviors, which we did in that particular cognitive psychology course, they behaved in exactly the way the students in the Intro to Microbiology course did. They stacked up all their practice. So, you know, you could talk about this stuff in your class, I feel, for a long time, like an entire semester in their case. They talked about these things and still never get students to change behavior. And that's really what this is all about. It's really, you know, to get the boost in retention and to get the boost in performance, you have to change behaviors. And that's what we have been experimenting with for the last, I don't know how long it's been, Marcia and Kelly, 4 years, 3.5 years, whatever it is. It's a long time that we've been experimenting with, hey, how do we get people to change behaviors? And we're finally seeing sort of the fruits of that labor.
I might just add that, James, as you mentioned, though, you know, that's an entire class that they teach on these various practicing methods. And even with an entire class on that, they haven't been able to get students to change their behaviors. But through this, as James mentioned, this very iterative process that we've been working on for the last 3-4 years, we finally been able to get students, you know, figured out how to get students to change behaviors, and trying to educate them a little bit on these practices with the video that James showed. Well, you know, said we had a video in the beginning, but obviously this isn't a class about study behaviors. This is a microbiology class, so they're only getting a little bit of content related to why they should use these study practices.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly, for just bringing that point around. Because yeah, I mean, what we didn't know, again, we didn't know if we could change behaviors, particularly with a 10-minute tutorial on these things and just refocusing the points, right? We didn't know if students would engage in it, and some of them don't. You know, I'll be honest, we have work to do. We're interested in you know, further change behavior mechanisms that might get other students to engage in this way. We're interested in how do we expose the benefits and the sort of boost that you get from these behaviors to students, and maybe what that would do. So that we have lots of things that we want to investigate to get more students to engage in these behaviors. And we still have work to do there, but we're really encouraged that we saw a significant change in behaviors, and we saw so many students changing their behaviors. That's really encouraging. Thanks, Kelly.
So we've got about 5 minutes left before the end of the session. So just a note for the speakers, and if you've got any last questions, now's the time to get them in.
There's some great, people are putting some great stuff in the chat, links to resources. So if you haven't picked up on those, thanks, Marcia. Thanks, Carmen. Yeah, the reference list is quite lengthy when it comes to this stuff. And, you know, just to maybe put some emphasis on why this is significant. The research is lengthy on the effect of these types of practices, but getting students in situation without forcing them to do these behaviors is very minimal. So I think that's the significance of U behavior, is we're actually getting students to self-regulate their own behaviors and to engage in these behaviors without forcing them down the path. And there's lots of research, or not lots, but a number of research studies which have been done in the classroom, but have been very controlled. For example, they will have students come to class, sit down, and get them to take a quiz at the beginning of class, right? And they do that at the beginning of every, that's one method to get people to space their practice, but it's very forced. And our entire sort of philosophy when we started U behavior was we wanted this to be more educational in its orientation. We wanted students to think about their behaviors and the impact of those behaviors on their performance, and get that as a part of a class that isn't focused on that, but get that and then potentially carry that forward. So one of the things we're going to be working on in the microbiology major is spreading this across the entire major, so that students are going through a major that is focused on, this is good practice for your long-term retention. And when they, when they graduate from CSU in that particular major, and maybe other majors, if we can get them on board, we have other majors interested, but that major, maybe when they graduate from CSU, they're just a little bit more confident about their cognition, and they understand that their behaviors have a pretty significant impact on how they're going to perform in life and how they're going to perform in learning. So that's my soapbox. That's my goosebumps speech. Gave me goosebumps. But yeah, that's what I get excited about, is like, that students actually walk away with that.
All right. On that goosebumpy note, still got about a minute and a half in case anybody wants to slip in one last question or one last go get 'em tiger type inspirational speech.
I'm all out.
All right. Well, James, thank you. And
Yeah.
Marcia and Kelly, thank you for all your great work and this exciting presentation.
Thank you for your support.
You bet.
Take care.
And thank you, everybody. And a quick reminder that there's spatial chat. It's a lot of fun if you haven't done it. And I think it's coming up at the top of the hour.
Nice. Okay. I'll be there. See
All right,
ya.
thank you, everybody.
Bye.